Hi, everyone. Aaron Lolito here with Chris Vogt. Over the past couple of months, we've done a bunch of roundtable discussions that I've posted to the website as audio features. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about what these are, a little bit about the format and why we like doing them. So just as a quick intro, if you haven't listened to any, the roundtable discussions are where we get together with a couple of other people and talk about a couple of the poems and visual art pieces, short stories that have appeared in Wild Roof Journal issues. So I'll give it to Chris for a little bit. Why do you like doing these? Why are you involved in this?
Yeah, well, I got to know Aaron almost 10 years ago, like 2012, when I started doing a program through our college. We're both college professors, and we met each other then doing kind of inner city work, and we were having fun riffing about literature and kind of talking about pretty nerdy literature subjects. And it's the kind of thing we weren't used to being able to talk about normally. And we also liked the fact that we weren't doing it at that, I'm going to use the phrase, graduate school voice, or at the graduate school level with that kind of pretentious sensitivity. We're just having a nice conversation. We're like able to riff and goof off with each other. And that's how we became friends. And so part of the idea for the roundtable with the Wild Roof Journal is we're able to have that kind of casual conversation. And in many cases, we can bring in people who have either written for the publication or who are interested in it. And we just have a nice, fun, casual conversation. And I realized how much I missed that in my life, particularly in the last couple of years with how things have been going.
Yeah, and that's worth mentioning too, is the kind of the feedback I've got from the other participants that we've had on previous issues. Some of them have been kind of readers at Wild Roof Journal, who've been helping us out. Definitely appreciate their help if you're listening out there. Some of them have been contributors, people who've written short stories and poems that have appeared in the issue. So it's really kind of a cool dynamic that we've stumbled into to kind of create this community. We have people coming back from previous issues, even if it was several months ago, to check out the new issues, pick a favorite. It's always nice revisiting something that maybe I read months ago, it got published, and looking at it with new eyes. It's a nice exercise, and to hear other people talk about why they like it is kind of fun too. It's not always you have the same opinion on a piece, but I feel like through our conversations, we find that we reach a consensus most of the times. We have sometimes similar takes. Sometimes we stumble onto a misreading or a reading that needs to get straightened out a little bit, or even just speculation about different possible layers of interpretation. So yeah, like you said, it was just kind of more of the approach of a conversational format, nothing too academic. We're not here to tell you about what these poems mean. But we do have some behind the scenes content. I know you like that when we have a little bit of insight.
As an English teacher, the idea that there are some circumstances under which we can actually ask a question about the poem or what the ending of a certain poem meant or what its significance was, symbolic, metaphorical, etc. And then we actually can hear from the author. As an English teacher who's been teaching dead authors most of his life, oh, isn't it nice to actually hear what the author, what it actually meant was, it is flowers. So it feels very good to be able to have that engagement, not just with readers and people who interpret the readings, but some of the authors get to chime in as well, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it was a fun part too, and it's something I didn't think of right at the very beginning. But it was a nice twist to include because, again, you can include somebody who maybe was published a month or two ago and say, hey, we're going to be talking about your piece. And if you want to give us a little bit of insight, not necessarily like what it means or the artist's statement or, like kind of what would appear in the gallery next to the painting or something like that. Which I'm always fascinated by the creative process behind something.
Correct me if I get the terminology wrong. Is it something like mort d'art or I think the translation is the death of the author. Have you had to deal with this yet?
No, what do you mean?
Oh, all right. So there's a school of thought called the death of the author. And there's an essay, I think, from the 70s, and we're exactly
Oh,
revealing how
gotcha.
much we know and know.
Roland Barthes.
But the idea is that, well, once the author's gone, then the text lives on its own, no biographical criticism whatsoever. And I have a little bit of resistance to that. And I love the idea that, yeah, you can actually not only think about the author, but in our case, ask the author. And the times we get to do that after we've had a conversation to try to figure a little bit of it out, there actually isn't that moment you might have in an English class where like, well, we'll never know. It's like, no, we actually get to hear from the author, and that's amazing. And we love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got what you're going for there. Yeah. So it is part of the fun to get, I mean, the author in this case is a real person. They're creating, stuff that matters to them. They have different processes. What's fun too is a lot of times contributors work in more than one mode. So, one person can do poems and visual art, for example. So they kind of have, you can kind of share a little bit about what made their poem work for them. And it's, an insight you wouldn't normally get to say, well, actually, I was really into photography and maybe a poem got published. And so that's what they're in the issue for. But, it's the influence behind it or the little bit story behind it is, something that, yeah, you wouldn't get just from reading it. You wouldn't get from the little bio. You got to listen to the podcast, I guess, to get some of these behind the scenes nuggets that I can get from some of the contributors who are kind enough to spend a couple of minutes of their day to respond to my questions. So that's another element to the conversation, and of course, just the back and forth of it. I mean, anybody who spent time in a reading group, a classroom, just with friends, like-minded people, whoever, that you get more out of something when you have that back and forth. You say, oh, I think this, I have this connection. I think that, I have this other connection. Like, oh, I never heard of that guy. I never heard of that poet, never heard of that artist. It gives you some new perspectives that just kind of, they're only going to give you a better sense of the poem and what it means. So, yeah, I think that was, I know, maybe not a surprise, but it was just something that was so refreshing. I think you kind of shared that.
I would say one of the most gratifying experiences from the 6 months or so we've been doing this is when we have an author kind of give their interpretation of the poem. I've been glad to be wrong. So if somebody corrects me, like, nope, the flowers meant this. I'm like, oh, okay. And then there's some sense that feels good. And I don't want to give too many teasers away, but we had one author who was named Rachel Glass, and she wrote a poem called Glass. And I had one interpretation, and then there was also a different interpretation. And the fact that we had to engage both what the author said and the text itself was fantastic. In graduate school, we often end with, well, and it's up to you, and how you're going to write it in your grad school paper. And it's like, well, okay, it's up to you and the grade that the teacher thinks they're going to give you. But here we're actually stripping that away, and we get to talk about how we feel about the poem, how we feel about the text, how we feel about the piece of art or visual, whatever it is. And sometimes we get corrected by the artist, and that feels great. And sometimes we don't. And there's a kind of freedom there that I didn't get in grad school. I love it.
Oh, absolutely. And if all that weren't enough, all that good stuff, it's always fun, in addition, to get writers' takes on writing. So if you're a writer, an artist listening, even that you might not have a poem or a piece of art that we're talking about in the episode, I feel like there's always some takes on, like, what did this do well? Like, why did this work? There's some technical angles that I think everybody we've talked to, me and you and everybody else, is a creative person. We've done writing, we've done other things. You play music, I do some visual art.
You play music. I'm embarrassed about my visual art. Yeah.
So
reinforce our mutual insecurity.
We have the other pieces of art that we're either proud of or embarrassed of or whatever. But we're all creating something, so we can kind of bring that mindset to a piece and say, oh yeah, you see what the writer did there? If they did it this way, it wouldn't have worked so well, but they did it that way and it works. And a lot of times we talk about like why a piece is good. You know, what made it work? What made it be appealing? Why does it get published over something that could be very close? We can get into a cliche territory where a poem covers a topic that's been covered, you know, how many
And
times?
if anybody's listening to this and they're or watching this as kind of an intro and they're not sure how they feel, I would add that there's also kind of an Anthony Bourdain element to this where we've gotten a little bit good at the thing, but we're also willing to know that we don't know what the hell we're talking about. And we're willing to listen to other people talk about what they talk about. And that's what we're interested in. We're not interested in criticizing or figuring out what's wrong with something. We're interested in sampling the soup and tasting this. I haven't tasted this before. Oh, this is delicious. I can't believe it. That's not my palate. That's, not something like personal to me. But that idea, we're exploring, and the idea that we're trying to, reach out and have conversations with people that we wouldn't have otherwise, even despite something like COVID. And the idea that we can have those conversations with people who are creative, they're interested, they're hungry, and we can kind of have those conversations in a way where there's no grades and there's no food critics. It's just us trying to sample what we like and talk about it.
That's a point worth adding too. It's not a critique. We're not approaching this as a critical reader in the sense of like trying to press against it and say why it, what needs to be changed or what should be changed, or to have that kind of authoritative view of it. Yeah, so that's and if you listen to our episodes, it hopefully wouldn't take very long to recognize that our tone is very much, we're supporting these writers. They appeared in our issues. We're fans of them. We like what they do, and we want to support what they do. So that's a huge piece to doing this. I call it a victory lap around our issues, because we do an issue every other month, and then we insert these podcast episodes in between and look back at each issue, pick some of the favorites. So it's like through all the process of putting the issue out, it's, at least from my perspective, it's nice to revisit some of these favorite pieces and just kind of like take a look at why they work so well. So that's a little bit about what we do here and why we do it. So I hope that was helpful. So me and Chris kind of take on the co-hosting duties and have a rotating cast of other creative people, writers and visual artists to talk them over with us. So if that sounds good at all, I hope you go back and listen to some of them and join us again.
We're also open for cinematographers or anybody that's in the visual arts of the video medium. So keep us in mind if you'd like to submit something. We're curious about that stuff as well.
Absolutely. We're open to all forms of art, all forms of creativity are welcome here. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you check us out.